Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is Iyad el-Baghdadi, a well-known pro-democracy activist who lives in exile in Norway. A few weeks ago, he was warned by Norway's security services that he was under threat, possibly from Saudi Arabia. Two other dissidents have received similar warnings in the US and Canada. Iyad el-Baghdadi, welcome to the France 24 interview from Oslo in Norway.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
Can you tell us what happened on April 25th?
Yeah, so it started like any usual day. And around middle of the day, around noon, I could notice some activity outside my apartment. And a few minutes later, a couple Norwegian intelligence officers, we call the agency here the PST, they showed up at my doorstep and they introduced themselves, they showed me their badges, and then they asked me to come with them. They said that they have a secure location prepared, and they took me there and sat me down and then proceeded to tell me that they received a tip from a partner intelligence agency indicating that I'm the target of a threat.
The partner intelligence agency has since been identified in reports as the CIA. The threat was that you were a target of Saudi Arabia and more specifically of its crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And as a result, you are under protection from the Norwegian security services for the past few weeks, your family, yourself?
Well, they're taking care of me. I mean, I'm not allowed to comment anymore on security arrangements.
Right. I mean, did they tell you about specific threats or is this a general threat?
Well, they said at the time that the threat was unspecified, and they said that they're working to learn more. Of course, I mean, since then it's been a few weeks now, so I do get updates from them from time to time, but they are not taking any chances when it comes to my security.
Right. Are you surprised that this happened? Obviously, a few months ago, over 6 months ago, the Saudi columnist Jamal Khashoggi, who you knew, was murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And you then tweeted, it's back October the 2nd, saying that if MBS, as he is known, was not reined in, if they get away with kidnapping, I'm quoting you, the next step will be assassinations in your capitals. And I'm not joking even a little bit.
Absolutely. And, to answer your earlier question, I actually was not surprised when they showed up. I think the first thing I told them at the time was, I've been expecting you, like something like, what took you so long? And that's because the history of my realization that I'm at risk really goes back to maybe a couple of weeks after Jamal's murder, when I started receiving certain tips and warnings saying that they're discussing you, they're aware of your activities, they're aware of your presence, and they see you as someone who is damaging to their reputation, especially in the English language sphere.
Right. Obviously, you at some point, and as well as another dissident or activist who has been warned that he was under threat, Omar Abdulaziz in Montreal, you worked in a way with Jamal Khashoggi, especially on Twitter and other social networks to try to counter what you say is Saudi propaganda. Do you think this is the reason why you all became targets for the regime?
Well, I mean, just to give a little bit more context to your viewers, it's not really just about countering propaganda. I mean, countering propaganda is part of it. The fact is that Twitter, since 2011, especially after the Arab Spring, kind of rose to becoming an alternative Arab public sphere. It became the place where Arabs can go online and express themselves freely, mainly because that option was not available. You could not do that in state media because conventional media was very tightly controlled. Saudi Arabia has had an especially dynamic and youthful public sphere, and it continued to thrive until the rise of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as MBS as we call him. Of course, the problem here is that he proceeded to take this very powerful tool of free expression and turn it from a tool of liberation to a tool of repression. And him and his right-hand man, Saud al-Qahtani, who I insist is still at his work.
Despite reports to the contrary, right?
I mean, he was shuffled around. He was removed from an official position, but he's pretty much at work, doing what he does best, which is go after dissidents and push out propaganda, and hatch out all kinds of themes, all kinds of ideas and all kinds of schemes. Of course, he does this on behalf of his master, eventually, Mohammed bin Salman. But the fact is that the reason why Twitter was very important, and the reason why Jamal Khashoggi was very interested in that, is of course because there is a direct relationship between access to a healthy public sphere and people's ability to liberate themselves from imposed narratives and from government narratives. So Jamal was very anguished. He was very concerned about the health of this public sphere, and he was very concerned about the fact that this was, Jamal, after all, considered his first identity was that of a journalist, and he was very concerned about free expression. And of course, he was himself a very important Twitter influencer. A lot of his friends who were also Twitter influencers had already been jailed because of their activities, because of expressing themselves on Twitter. So eventually it became kind of one of his missions became trying to do whatever he can to reclaim that space, that online space of free expression.
Right, and I mean, you participated and tried to also work in that sphere. Have you been told to go back to the Norwegian security that you should also watch your devices and so on, because there have been reports of hacking by the Saudis, or at least people working on behalf of the Saudi authorities? Is this really a concern, or is this more of a fantasy?
No, it's near the top of the concerns. It's actually one of the top risks. In fact, if they are, I mean, when the Saudis target someone, physically, just as they did with Jamal, you will notice that they precede that. Before doing that, they actually try to get into their devices, because it also helps locating them. It helps track them. It helps know, their movements, etc.
Has this happened for you?
And of course, I am not aware. I'm not 100% sure yet. The reason being, the software that they use is actually very, very advanced, and it's very difficult to trace. So I am, of course, in touch with security experts, both in Norway and beyond, and we're doing all we can to increase my digital security.
Right. How do you put together the idea that the CIA is warning you through the Norwegian security and probably other dissidents about the dangers of being targets for elimination by the Saudi, and Donald Trump hosting Mohammed bin Salman, even European countries who condemned Saudi Arabia after the killing, now trickling back to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and a question I think that I've been asked several times over the past week. Look, the United States is a country of laws and a country of institutions. And not all of these institutions always work in tandem and agree with each other. In this case, in the case of the relationship between Trump and, I should emphasize, not only Trump, but really importantly, Jared Kushner and Mohammed bin Salman, seems to be especially troubling, mainly because it seems to me that all the other U.S. institutions seem to have this, a very clear idea that Mohammed bin Salman is bad news. He is impulsive, he is undisciplined, he is brutal, and in certain ways he's incompetent. This is a problem mainly because Saudi Arabia continues to be an important ally. It will continue to be an important ally and an important country in the region. So this presents a very difficult situation and a kind of conundrum to policymakers in general, because you cannot cut off Saudi Arabia. It continues to be an important ally, but at the same time, it is so dangerous and damaging to deal with someone like Mohammed bin Salman, especially that the administration, which is most capable of holding him to account and reining him in, is currently his biggest enabler. And I emphasize again, Jared Kushner.
Very last question, Iyad el-Baghdadi. Are you afraid for your life, and do you intend to continue being very vocal about Saudi Arabia and other Arab regimes?
Well, I mean, thank you for the question. I mean, I believe I'm very well taken care of here in Norway. I completely trust and have faith in the competence and care of Norwegian authorities. And look, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of courage for me to speak out and be outspoken and visible in Oslo. There are people who are far braver than I am because they are outspoken in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt and in Lebanon and in Sudan. It's simply not possible for us to stop. Not only because this is some kind of loyalty for Jamal and Jamal's legacy, but also because we understand our place in history. This is an intergenerational struggle. This is an intergenerational transition, and we have to play our share. And I believe the countries on the world, the free world, needs to decide which side of history they want to stand on.
On those words, thank you very much, Iyad el-Baghdadi, for being with us here on France 24. And thank you for watching this edition of The Interview.